We met at a pool party. I remember that day clearly. It was in the middle of an unforgettable heat wave. Alfie smiled at me from across the pool, and the rest was history. Not only was he gorgeous and completely unaware of it, but he was also a fantastic listener. No matter who he spoke to, he listened intently. He was never just waiting for his turn to speak, never just nodding absent-mindedly. He absorbed every word, eyes bright and understanding. Later, when I told him that was one of my favorite things about him, he smiled and said, "Most people just want to be understood. It isn't difficult if you pay attention." He has always paid attention. Even in the early months of our relationship, he remembered everything. How I take my coffee, which side of the bed I prefer, that I can't sleep without my bedside fan or my childhood teddy, Scrappy. There had always been a quiet predictability to our life together. We'd wake up at the same time each morning. I'd shower first, he'd make coffee. We'd meet in the kitchen in the soft light of dawn before the day properly began, moving around one another with the ease that comes from long-term familiarity. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we wouldn't. Silence never felt uncomfortable. Then came the shift. He was handing me my morning coffee. "Milk and 2 sugars, right?" I laughed because I thought he was joking. We'd been together for 9 years, married for 4, and I'd never taken sugar in my coffee. Not once. "No sugar, you're sweet enough," he'd say. We had both been sleeping a little less than usual lately. I put it down to nothing more than a brief moment of forgetfulness caused by tiredness. I kissed him on the cheek, took the coffee, and told him not to worry about it. Then he started watching me sleep. Now, I've always been a light sleeper. A change in temperature or a shift in the light will wake me. For years, that sensitivity never bothered me. If I woke in the early hours and turned my head, I'd find Alfie beside me exactly as expected, fast asleep with one arm tucked beneath the pillow, breathing deeply. Recently, though, I turn to face him and find him already awake, not moving, not on his phone scrolling, just simply lying there looking right at me. The first time it happened, I smiled at him, still half asleep, and asked what he was doing. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Did I wake you?" "No," I told him, and reached for his hand beneath the covers. But it kept happening. Not every night, but enough for me to pick up on it. Each time, the explanation was reasonable. He'd woken early, he'd had something on his mind, he hadn't wanted to disturb me by getting up. Although it made sense, it kept me up at night. There was something about the way he was watching me that bothered me. It wasn't intrusive or intense. If anything, it was gentle, the same attentive expression he'd always worn around me. But lying there in the dark, meeting his eyes before either of us had fully entered the day, I had the faint, disorienting sense that something was off. I just couldn't put my finger on what. Even with minimal sleep, life continued as it does. The usual routine of work, dinner, and an evening lounging on the sofa. All the normal things. He became more perceptive than ever, more aware of my moods, quicker to anticipate what I needed before I asked. It felt, on the surface, like a deepening of the same gentle love he'd always shown me. Which is why, when I'd catch him staring, I tell myself it was nothing more than a look of admiration. And for a while, I had no reason to believe otherwise. With time, the staring crept its way into the daytime too. I'd be washing the dishes and would catch him in the reflection of the kitchen window, standing behind me, still as a statue, just watching me. I'd turn around and he'd spring back to life, tending to whatever menial task had previously garnered his attention. He also started repeating things I said. It would happen hours after the initial conversation, sometimes even the next day. He'd do it casually and in a slightly altered context, as though the words had occurred to him independently. One afternoon, I mentioned that the air in the house felt strangely heavy. It wasn't a particularly unusual observation, just something I had said without thinking as I opened a window. At the time, he'd simply nodded. But then, later that evening, as we sat on the sofa scrolling through Netflix, he looked around the room and said those exact words. The air feels strangely heavy. I waited for a sign that he was joking, that he was deliberately echoing me. But instead, he looked mildly contemplative, like the thought was completely his own. When I asked what he meant, he shrugged. I know it might not sound like much, but I can't express how unlike Alfie these behaviors were. There were other changes too, like slightly delayed responses. I don't think anyone else would have picked up on it, but I knew my husband like the back of my hand. He was changing. If I laughed, he laughed, but a little too late. If I frowned, he frowned, but after a pause. It felt like he was mirroring me, as though without my lead he wouldn't know which emotion to express. One evening, after a particularly shitty day at work, I relayed my frustrations to him. It was nothing dramatic, just office politics, the sort of thing we'd discussed 100 times before. As I spoke, I watched his face. For a brief moment after I finished, his expression remained completely neutral. Then, as if remembering what should come next, his features arranged themselves into sympathy. "That sounds frustrating," he said. The words were correct. The tone was correct too, and yet, for reasons I couldn't properly justify, I felt uncomfortable. Enough was enough. I decided I would call him out on it, hoping to clear things up to stop me feeling so on edge all the time. "You've been a bit different lately," I said one day as we cleared the dishes, hoping I didn't sound too accusatory. He looked up at me, his expression blank. Different. The word hung between us for a moment. I felt a flicker of embarrassment, wondering if maybe I shouldn't have said anything. I opened my mouth to soften the blow, to explain that I hadn't meant anything serious by it, but he spoke first. "I'm sorry if it feels that way. Work's been taking up more space in my head than I realized." His voice was warm, reassuring, just like always. I nodded, already prepared to let the matter go. But then, in that same even tone, he continued. "You've seemed a little on edge yourself recently." "What?" I said, surprised. "I assumed that maybe you were just tired. You haven't been sleeping properly." He was right, I hadn't. With a small, sympathetic smile, Alfie stepped closer, resting his hand lightly against my arm. "You've been noticing things more, haven't you?" I nodded. "Sometimes when you focus on the little things too much, they start to feel bigger than they are." I contemplated his words. It wasn't until that exact moment I considered maybe I had been the problem all along. The conversation began with me expressing a small uncertainty about him, But now I was questioning myself instead. Yeah, I eventually replied. Like you said, I'm probably just tired. From then on, I deliberately tried to stop noticing things, telling myself that it's easy for ordinary behaviors to appear unusual if you examine them too closely. So instead, when he paused before responding, I tell myself he was just thinking. When I caught him looking at me from across the room, I assumed he was just admiring me. When small details slipped, like a forgetful moment or a repeated phrase, I let them pass without comment. This worked at first. The house felt calmer, but underneath that calm ran a thin, persistent awareness that I was working quite hard to maintain it, that I was adjusting my own perception so that nothing he did would seem unusual enough to question. I snapped out of that mindset one evening when he did something so strange and out of character that I just couldn't ignore it. I'd been brushing my teeth when I caught him staring again. I spun around and met his gaze, expecting him to smile or say something. He didn't move, he didn't break eye contact, he just stood there, hands by his sides, head tilted slightly, staring. Something about his eyes bothered me. They were a little too wide, and there was a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. And with it came a feeling I'd never felt towards Alfie before. Dread. After what felt like eternity, he parted his lips to speak. You've been brushing your teeth for a while now. Everything okay? How long had he been standing there? He walked towards me, eyes unblinking. Instinctively, I took a step back. He noticed and let out a chuckle, seemingly amused by my uncertainty. I tried to stand my ground as he approached me further, but my body flinched as he raised a hand to my shoulder. Another chuckle. Come on, darling, let's go to bed. My heart sank. Darling. He never called me that. I was certain then he was different. So, in the days that followed, I began testing him. While pretending everything was fine, I purposefully changed small details in my stories to see how he'd react. The old Alfie would have questioned me, maybe gently corrected me, but this altered Alfie didn't register. Or if he did, he didn't let on. I spoke about the day we first met, describing it as a snowy day in December. He didn't correct me, so I kept going. I talked about wearing a brown fur coat when we passed each other on the street. I told an entirely fabricated story, watching him closely, waiting for him to burst out laughing or call me out on my bullshit, but he didn't. He listened without interruption, smiling softly. That evening, as we lay in bed in the dark, he rolled onto his side and said softly, "You're as beautiful as you were the day I met you." I froze, waiting to see if he'd taken the bait. I knew even then that you were someone I could build a life with. That beautiful snowy day changed everything for me. I felt sick. I rolled over and pretended to be asleep, but I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay there, staring at the wall, wondering where the Alfie I knew and loved had gone. I cried softly as he slept, oblivious to my heartache. The next morning, he handed me my coffee. "2 sugars," he said. "Extra sweet, just like you." I set the mug down on the counter a little too forcefully, startling him. "We didn't meet in December," I said flatly. "It was August, during that awful heat wave. Remember? He looked up at me, confused. No, he said slowly. It was definitely December. It was snowing. You were wearing that brown fur coat. I scoffed and shook my head. I've never owned a fur coat in my life. You know I hate fur. He held my gaze as if waiting for me to correct myself. Are you sure? Absolutely sure, I snapped, grabbing the mug and pouring its contents down the sink. And I don't take sugar in my coffee. Yes, you do. You always have. 2 sugars, sweet like you. Are you feeling all right? No, I snapped. No sugar, I'm sweet enough. We stood in silence, waiting for the other to cave. Sorry, he muttered eventually. I've been a bit forgetful recently. I'm sure you're right. He looked genuinely sorry, and I felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't raised his voice, he hadn't said anything unkind, and there I was, snapping at him, slamming things about. Something I never did, not even on our worst days. I had acted out of character, and the irony of that was not lost on me. I exhaled deeply, the fight draining out of me as quickly as it had arrived. No, I'm sorry, I said quietly, unable to meet his eyes. I shouldn't have snapped like that. He accepted my apology and kissed my cheek before leaving for work. Once again, I couldn't shake the creeping suspicion that perhaps this really was all my fault, that I was the one distorting ordinary moments into something they weren't. I felt like I was losing my mind. That evening, I would doubt my sanity once again. I was getting ready for bed, only Scrappy wasn't on the pillow where I'd left him. Alf? I called, tearing apart the duvet and searching under the bed. He appeared in the doorway, wearing a pair of blue pajamas I've never seen before. He normally slept in his boxers. I can't find Scrappy, I said, putting the pajamas to the back of my mind. I've looked everywhere. I was met with the blank stare I was becoming all too familiar with. Scrappy, I repeated. I can't find him. Alfie pointed to the cupboard. Why is he in there? I asked. You put him there. What? No, I didn't. Yeah, you did. You definitely put him in there this morning. I watched you do it. I tried to think back, but all I could remember of that morning was Alfie's sorry expression and the guilt I'd felt for accusing him of being different. A dull ache pulsed behind my eyes, so I closed them, pinching the bridge of my nose. Maybe he was right. Perhaps I'd accidentally tidied Scrappy away. That didn't feel right to me, but it wasn't entirely impossible. I couldn't focus in the office the next day. He had definitely been wrong, hadn't he? Of course we met in the summer, right? Had I really put Scrappy in the wardrobe by mistake? Then I started to wonder if it even mattered at all. I eventually concluded that perhaps it didn't, and once again I was prepared to let it all go. I stopped by the bakery on my way home from work to get some of those blueberry muffins he loved. A peace offering, a way to put this whole thing behind us. I let myself in the front door, box of muffins tucked under one arm. Before I could shout hello, I noticed him sitting on the sofa with his hands placed neatly in his lap. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there staring at the TV. It was switched off. Our eyes met in the reflection of the black screen, and he slowly turned to face me. He raised his arm robotically and gave a forced, unnatural wave of his hand. Ah, you bought muffins. His voice was devoid of emotion, Chocolate? Blueberry. Oh. His mouth formed a thin line and he slowly turned away from me. I thought they were your favorite, I said to the back of his head. I'm allergic to blueberries. I stood there dumbfounded. He absolutely was not allergic to blueberries. He wasn't allergic to fucking anything. Anger surged through my veins, but I bit my tongue. He was messing with me, he had to be. You weren't the last time you ate them, I muttered. Look, he replied, taking a deep breath and turning to face me. I don't know what's going on with you recently, and I didn't really want to say anything, but I'm starting to get worried. You keep getting things confused and it's clearly making you angry. That's so unlike you. You've just been so different lately. Me, I scoffed. You're the one who keeps staring at me, and copying me, and being all fucking weird. I had never raised my voice at Alfie before. He looked shocked, then disappointed. He shook his head solemnly. See what I mean? He said quietly. You've got it all backwards. You're the one doing all those things. I wake up in the night and you're just watching me, staring at me. And you keep repeating things I've said, really weird, insignificant things like, oh, the air feels strangely heavy in here, when I'd literally said the exact phrase only hours before. What? There was no way. That couldn't be possible, could it? My heart began to thud and my head spun, causing me to stumble backwards. Alfie jumped up and rushed over, offering me his arm. I took it, trying to swallow the sickness that was creeping up from the pit of my stomach. Let's talk about this later, okay? He said softly before kissing my forehead. Why don't you go take a nice bath? We can both take a moment to cool off and we'll have a chat this evening. Sound good? I nodded. I took myself upstairs, locking the bathroom door behind me. For a while, I just stood there, hands clutching the edge of the sink as I stared at my own reflection. The skin under my eyes was puffy, almost purple. I tried to slow down the sudden, shallow rhythm of my breathing. How could I possibly be the one in the wrong? I was certain that blueberry muffins were his favorite. We'd had blueberry cake at our wedding, too. It had this beautiful pale baby blue icing, with fresh blueberries cascading down one side. I was sure of it. I made a mental note to dig out the photo album later and prove it to myself. I turned the taps on, letting the bathroom fill with steam as thoughts whirled around in my mind. I squeezed my eyes shut as a sharp, pulsing headache pressed behind my temples. I shifted my focus to the sound of the rushing water, waiting for the pain to fade into a dull ache. When I opened my eyes, the water had nearly risen to the rim of the tub. I lurched forward and twisted the taps, not bothering to question how long I'd zoned out for. I lowered myself into the bath. The house was quiet and the warm water offered some sense of comfort. My eyelids grew heavy and I allowed them to close, focusing on my breath. In, out, in, out. I stayed like that for a while, before drifting into a dreamless sleep. A loud creak woke me up. I glanced over at the locked door. The thin strip of light beneath it dimmed suddenly. A shadow. Every muscle in my body went rigid as I stared at that narrow line. Someone was standing there, right on the other side of the door, not moving, not knocking, just there. I could feel it in the air, the way you can feel someone's presence even without seeing them, that unmistakable awareness of another body occupying the space just inches away from yours. Seconds dragged past, heavy and distorted. My heart pounded. Then, without warning, the shadow vanished. Erratic footsteps tore down the hallway outside, thundering away from the door. Too fast, too uneven. A chaotic scramble that sent a violent jolt through my entire body. I flinched so hard that the water sloshed over the side of the tub. The sound stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving behind a suffocating silence that pressed in from all sides. Had that really just happened? Had I been dreaming? In a daze, I reached for a towel and dried myself off. In the bedroom, I put on my pajamas, grabbing Scrappy from the bed and pulling him close to my chest. I lingered in the doorway for a moment before forcing myself into the hall and down the stairs. When I reached the bottom and looked into the living room, I stopped. Everything was wrong. The sofa was pressed up against a different wall with a blanket I'd never seen before folded neatly over the back of it. The TV sat on the other side of the room. In fact, every piece of furniture was in a completely different place. I looked at the curtains. They used to be gray, but now were blue. The candles on the side table were green, not orange. But most disturbingly of all, there, on the mantelpiece, was a photo from our wedding. Slowly, I edged towards it. "Babe?" Alfie appeared from the kitchen. I leaned in, examining the picture. We were cutting the cake. Our plain, white wedding cake. I collapsed it to my knees. Alfie hurried across the room, his footsteps quick but careful. He crouched down beside me, lifting my chin with his finger. "Hey, what is it?" he asked, his voice low and soft. The kindness in it was too much. My chest tightened, and before I could stop myself, I began to cry. I buried my face in his chest, clutching his shirt. He wrapped his arms around me without hesitation, holding me close as I shook against him. "It's going to be okay," he whispered. "I've got you." I took the next few days off work, and so did Alfie. I didn't ask him to, but he insisted. He held my hand as I made a call to the doctors, setting up an appointment for the following week. He brought me coffee, black, no sugar. He even rearranged the furniture just to put me at ease. "Huh, I like it better this way," he said as he stood back and admired the room. I smiled. "Thank you," I said weakly. My head still throbbed and my eyes were still crusty from all the tears, but I felt okay. For the first time in a while, I felt hopeful. Alfie was right. It was going to be okay. We went to the appointment together. The doctor didn't look at me when he spoke. "Stress," he said, tapping something into the computer. "And exhaustion. Very common." He printed the prescription and handed it to me. "These will help you sleep. Deep sleep, that's what you need." Alfie squeezed my hand with a reassuring smile. The first week of taking the tablets was bliss. I'd pop a pill and fall asleep within minutes. And it was a good sleep too. Dreamless, like I was dead to the world. But nothing lasts forever, apparently, as sometime during the week, I started feeling the side effects. As sometime during the second week, I started feeling the side effects. I kept having these awful nightmares. In them, I'd wake up to find Alfie acting strangely. In one dream, he was completely naked and hunched over, his mouth hanging open in a wide, unnatural smile that stretched the skin of his cheeks. In another, I rolled over in bed to find him staring at me, his eyes so wide I could see the whites all the way around the irises. Every time, I'd squeeze my eyes shut, willing the dream to end. Eventually, I'd fall back asleep and wake up sometime later in a cold sweat. I tell Alfie about the nightmares each morning. He'd listen, frowning, equally as disturbed by them as I was. He suggested that perhaps my brain was just adjusting to the medication, that eventually the dreams would stop. I hope so, I said. I don't know how much more of this I can take. They're not real, remember? Just dreams. I nodded. Just dreams. That night, I woke suddenly, heart thudding. I sat up. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and at the end of the hallway, something moved. He was there, on all fours. My husband was crouched at the end of the corridor, his spine arched strangely high. His head hung low between his shoulders. His eyes were wide, wild, and fixed on me. Alfie? His mouth opened. That same huge, silent smile. Then he moved. With a jerking of limbs, he scurried at an inhuman speed, palms and feet slapping the floor as he rushed towards the bedroom. I shrieked and threw myself back into bed, dragging the covers over my head. The mattress dipped as he climbed onto it. I squeezed my eyes shut and held my breath, waiting for fingers, teeth, anything. I woke gasping for air. Morning light filled the room. The door was closed, Alfie's side of the bed cold and empty. That night, I didn't take a tablet. I kept this information for myself, not wanting to concern Alfie. I waited until he was in the bathroom, then slipped the tablet back into the bottle and returned it to the bedside drawer. When he came to bed, I pretended to swallow it with a sip of water. I lay awake for hours, waiting for nightmares that never came. At some point, Alfie stirred next to me. I closed my eyes and pretended to sleep, not wanting him to question why I was awake. I felt a soft tap on my shoulder. Damn it, I thought, he's onto me. I kept my breathing slow and heavy, counting a few seconds before stirring to make my sleepy act seem more convincing. When I rolled over, his voice came from across the room. Over here. When my eyes adjusted to the night, I saw him standing rigidly in the corner of the room. His eyes bulged from his face as though something inside his skull was pushing them outward. Saliva dripped from his gaping mouth, which was stretched into a wide, panting grin. Something at his side shimmered in the light of the moon. A knife. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I watched in horror as he slowly raised the blade to his neck, dragging it gently across his throat in a silent, mocking promise. I shut my eyes tightly and turned away, burrowing beneath the duvet, my body locked in terror as I felt him crawl back into bed. He fell asleep not long after. I lay awake trembling, still unable to move. When the morning light finally crept through the curtains and I heard him rise to start his day, I realized what I'd witnessed hadn't been a dream at all, 'cause I had never fallen asleep. I made a plan to pack up my things and get the hell out of here. Whether I was imagining it or not, I couldn't risk staying in that house with him. He checked on me before leaving for work. As I lay in bed pretending to be sick, I mumbled some excuse about calling the office to tell them I wasn't coming in. He rested his hand on my forehead, and it took every ounce of my being not to recoil. "You do feel clammy," he said, feigning a look of concern. "Do you want me to stay with you?" My pulse raced. "No," I said, trying to sound casual. "No point. I'll be asleep for most of the day, I imagine." He nodded. "Okay, well, take it easy. I'll be back this evening to look after you. I love you." I waited for the sound of the front door to close behind him before springing out of bed. I just needed the essentials. My keys, my phone, my charger, my purse. I'd figure the rest out later. I shoved my things into a bag and hurried down the stairs. Shit, Scrappy. I ran back up to the bedroom. He wasn't on the bed. He wasn't under it. The wardrobe. I flung open the cupboard and rifled through its contents. He was buried beneath a pile of clothes that had fallen from their hangers. I went to grab him, but something else caught my eye. The glossy corner of a photograph peeked out from a small gap in the back panel of the wardrobe. A sickening thought crossed my mind. Pressing gently against it, the panel shifted with a soft, reluctant creak, revealing a narrow seam that hadn't been there before. Heart hammering, I pushed it further. It was a secret compartment. I took a closer look at the photo that had led me to this discovery. Vomit rose in my throat, my hands shaking as the picture fell from my gentle grasp. It was us on our wedding day, cutting our cake, our blueberry cake. Reluctantly, I leant forward, peering into the compartment. Our photo albums were back there, but they looked different. I pulled one out and opened it. On every page, sticky notes clung to the photographs. Frantic errors, underlines, suggestions. The notes didn't describe our memories. They dissected them, speculating how each image could be changed, reframed, and made to say something else entirely. There was a picture of us in the living room when we first moved in together. The furniture was exactly where I'd remembered it being. A cold, sharp dread settled in my chest as the pieces fell into place. Every conversation that had left me doubting myself, every time I caught him staring at me, every odd behavior, every time he'd convinced me I was the problem, all of it had been orchestrated. By him. By Alfie. By the love of my life. The slow erosion of my sanity hadn't been accidental. For months and months, he sowed the seed of doubt in my mind, manipulating me, tricking me, gaslighting me. All of it had been real, and all of it had been him. I sat there on the bedroom floor, a sea of emotions rushing through me. I felt everything all at once, and it was too much for me to deal with then and there. A voice in the back of my head told me it would take years of therapy to unpack this. I wouldn't be able to trust anyone ever again. Numbly, I retrieved my belongings and descended the stairs. The urgency I'd had only minutes ago had completely left my body. There wasn't room for it. I was halfway to the door when it opened toward me. Only me, I forgot my... We stopped. Our eyes met. With a look of concern I knew was pretend, Alfie examined my face, checking for tears, for anger, for anything that might tell him what he was walking into. I watched him do it. I watched the familiar softness appear, that careful attentiveness he wore when he thought something was wrong. Then he saw it. He saw that I knew. His concern vanished in an instant. It was as if a switch had been flipped behind his eyes, the warmth replaced with something icy and cold. "Figured it out," he said. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I didn't run. I simply looked back at the stranger in front of me, the love I once had for him non-existent. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you do it?" He shrugged. "No," I said. "I need an answer. It's the least I deserve." His eyes were steady and clear, but eerily empty, as if nothing human stirred behind them. "Because I could." And that was it. All that he'd done, all that he'd put me through, there was no reason, no master plan. It was all for sport. I pushed past him, door closing behind me as I headed for my car. I sat with my hands on the wheel as I stared back at the house we'd shared together. It was nothing more to me now than a pile of bricks. While reversing out the drive, unsure of where I was going, a realization hit me. I understood with a cold and final clarity that the most terrifying part wasn't what he'd done. It wasn't why he'd done it. It was how easily he would go on living now, untouched, unbothered, while I gathered the scattered pieces of my mind he had so carefully, deliberately broken, just because he could.